Back now to our top story. The Integrity Commissioner has found that Housing Minister Steve Clark broke ethics rules in the Greenbelt development. NDP leader Mart Stiles is speaking to the media right now at Queen's Park Studio. Let's listen in.
Mr. Clark contravened the Members' Integrity Act is shameful, but I would say not all that surprising, even with what is a very high threshold for a violation. Because right from the beginning, we all knew, and I think Ontarians knew, that something didn't smell right. And we are now getting some answers. And that's why I filed my request with the Integrity Commissioner that he investigate the minister's actions back in December. The commissioner interviewed 61 witnesses. He reviewed emails, maps, documents, text messages, and briefing decks. That's a lot to dig into, and I want to thank the Integrity Commissioner and his office for the work that they've done. But we know that Minister Clark contravened now the conflict of interest and part of the insider information sections of the Members' Integrity Act. So we need to call it what it is: corruption. It's been clear to us that Mr. Clark needs to resign. We've been calling for that for 3 weeks since the Auditor General's report was released. Now it's time that the Premier needs to do his job and kick him out of cabinet. Enough is enough. Recall the legislature immediately so we can restore the lands to the Greenbelt, fire the minister, and give the people of this province an opportunity to truly hear from the Premier, hear the questions that the opposition can ask, and shine some light on what's taken place here. So I will say I think that we are at a place as well. I've never seen anything like this, a 200-page report. It's very clear that this, I would say, merits investigation by the RCMP. But again, the buck stops at the top. We've seen the minister refuse to resign. We've called it what it is. We saw a really damning report from the Auditor General. We need to see the Premier now take the step of removing his minister. And I'm happy to take any questions.
So the report was pretty damning, obviously, but it did say that the minister essentially didn't know what was going on, even though that's an aggravating factor, like not in his favor. Do you believe that, or do you think that? Do you still think that maybe he knew some more than he was letting on?
Well, was it? I guess you could say that at best, what we see here is gross incompetence, and that the minister was clearly unable to do his job. Which, by the way, this was all coming directly from the Premier and the Premier's office in terms of the mandate letter, right? But at worst, it's corruption and it's colluding with developers. And it was always and continues to always be about ensuring that a very small number of developers profited immensely from these decisions. So, I think there's still a question of what the government is not releasing, what information they're not sharing with Ontarians. I think there's a lot more here and to come. And I would remind you as well that there's still an outstanding request on my part for the investigation to extend to the Premier and the Premier's actions.
I'm sorry.
Is it corruption, though, if the minister didn't know what was going on?
I think if it's willfully, choosing to turn away from what you know is happening here, right? I mean, look at the speed, at the haste with which this all took place, the deception. I think that, it again, I mean, I've always said from the beginning of this that if it wasn't just like outright, knowledge of what was happening, it was deep incompetence. But I think that there's another side to this, which the Integrity Commissioner gets at, which is that if you're turning a blind eye to it, is that because, you don't really want to be, you want plausible deniability, which is actually a term that the Auditor General also used in her report.
Mara, what does it say to you that the Premier has so far stood by Steve Clark and expressed his confidence in him and kept him in this role?
It says to me that the Premier does not care that his government is losing the trust of Ontarians, and doesn't believe that his government should be held to a higher standard of accountability or integrity. It's, I think, really shameful. I think that I can't remember another time when we've seen a government or a Premier dig in like this. It says to me that the Premier is more concerned about these developers losing out on this deal than he is about the trust of Ontarians. And what we've seen over the last few weeks is one of the greatest breaches of trust in the history of the province of Ontario, I think. Yeah, of the Ontario government.
Do you think if Minister Clark resigns or is removed from his role and the government plows ahead with this plan to develop the Greenbelt as they presented it, do you think that solves their problems?
I think it's deeply unacceptable. I mean, that's the other piece of this, is there's no way you can read this report and think that this was conducted in a proper way. Obviously not. The process was not fair. It was corrupt. There was collusion. It was deceptive. It was hasty. I mean, I can think of many, many ways to describe this process. Nothing supports this continuation of this plan. They need to reverse course. I mean, I haven't shied away from saying that my interest in this, at the end of the day, is to return the land from the Greenbelt, from these developers to the Greenbelt. I want them to reverse course. But I do not see how this government can stand by this decision now. There's no way. They need to reverse course immediately. Nothing that they have done will have the trust of Ontarians, that any of this was in their interest, because it has never been about housing. It was not about housing, and to this date, it is not about housing.
Bart, as you said, it's been damning report after damning report, and yet after the other report, the Premier stood by the Minister, and the Minister has stood by the decisions, saying, okay, maybe a few mistakes were made. What makes you think the Premier will change course now?
Well, I mean, we can hope, right? We can hope that the Premier will see the error in his ways, that he will step up and be a leader, a real leader. Will try to build back trust in government. And the only way to do that is to take these actions. But I'm going to take it a step further. I want to see the Premier stop messing around now and share his mandate letters with the people of this province. We've seen 2 reports now. The Integrity Commissioner, the Auditor General reference specific sections of the mandate letter that was given to the Housing Minister. The government is fighting in court to prevent the mandate letters that went to all of their ministers from being released to the public. My goodness, what are they trying to hide? How bad could it be? What are they trying to hide? The Premier needs to make available the details of what the cell phone conversations are he's been having on his private phone. What happened to the emails that were deleted by staff that were detailed in the Auditor General's report? There's a lot that still remains hidden from the public, from the people of this province. Why is the Premier hiding that? Why is he holding on and refusing to ask for his minister's resignation?
On the mandate letters, what do you make of those snippets that we're learning from these 2 investigations? What do they tell you?
They tell me that despite the Premier's many statements, even as recently as June 2022 in the last provincial election, when he said they would not be selling off the Greenbelt, they had every intention of doing it. I mean, they turned around and they drafted mandate letters that included absolutely that intention, and that just didn't happen overnight. They even in this report talk about how they had, in the Integrity Commissioner's report, he talks about how they had been, always seen this as one of the possible tools. So it tells me that they lied over and over and over to the people of this province during the election, before the election, in the 2018 election. They had every intention of selling off the Greenbelt. And it also tells me that the Premier and his office are very much part of this decision. You know, so I think, again, that's why the Premier has to answer for this. And there have to be consequences. And the very trust and integrity of our democracy and our government are at stake here. And I say that, and I've been traveling around the province all summer. I've been to riding after riding after riding, whether you're in cities or small towns or on farms in rural Ontario, in northern Ontario. Everybody is talking about this. Everyone is talking about it. They want the decision reversed, and they want the government. They don't trust the government anymore. It's very significant, and the Premier can try all he wants to downplay it, but Ontarians are smarter than that. Yeah.
The Commissioner is calling for the Housing Minister to be reprimanded for his failure in this case. What consequences do you hope, what do you hope the Premier will face in this whole decision as well?
Well, I mean, this is one of the problems with, frankly, the Members' Integrity Act, and the rules here in Ontario are not strong enough. So the Integrity Commissioner can only recommend reprimand. And, you know, this is a point we've made. I've even brought forward motions to try to toughen up the legislation, because I think MPPs should be held to a higher standard than what we are currently, frankly. You would hope that we swear oaths and that we stick by them, but clearly not everybody does that. And so we need stronger tools. And so, we'll see what happens next, and how the legislature also determines what happens next. But I would hope, again, like, to me, the reprimand is just a piece of it. The Premier is the one who has the power to demand the resignation of to kick his minister out of cabinet. The Premier has the power to make those mandate letters public. The Premier has the power to recall the legislature, right now, today. He's done it for all kinds of reasons. I would think this is is a significant reason to recall the legislature and reverse course. A fine.
We've been listening to Ontario NDP leader Mart Stiles speaking to the media, responding to the most recent report by the Integrity Commissioner that found that Housing Minister Steve Clark broke ethics rules. She's calling for his resignation and for the land to be returned back to the Greenbelt.